His name was Elias Marés. He was 40 years old, and on the morning this story begins, he was down in the mud of Paso Verde, shoeing another man's horse. The iron was hot. His hands were sure. He drove the nail clean and bent the point and never once looked up. A Kell rider came past on the road. The man reined in. He looked down at Elias the way you look at a stone in your boot. "Step aside," he said. "Step aside for people who own land." Elias stepped aside. He said nothing. He went back to the fire. Here is the thing about that ground he stood on. That mud. That very dirt. His own father once owned it outright. Every acre. Elias did not know this. Not yet. He only knew the hammer, and the coin it earned, and the shame he had carried so long he no longer felt its weight. 200 miles north, that same day, they were burying a great man. Near 400 came to bury him. The whole of Sabine County. Cattlemen wept in their good black coats. The church could not hold them all. They said he was the finest family man the range ever raised. They said it, and they believed it. Ambrose Kell. 30 years a rancher, 30 years a pillar, and his widow stood at the grave in a black veil and told them all, "My husband leaves everything to the sons who earned his name." Two truths in one country. The honored dead, the disowned living. Neither knew the other's face, and on his last night, the great man had reached for his youngest boy. He gripped the boy's wrist hard. There was a town on his lips, and a mission, and the word repeated. "The book," he said. "Find the book." Then his breath ran out before the sentence did. He died with the rest of it still inside him. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, do something for me. Subscribe to the channel so you can ride the whole way to the end, and in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story rides. Go on, I'll wait. Now, let me tell it to you slow, and let me tell it right. They buried Ambrose Kell on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of pewter. The wind came flat across the range and worried the fringe of the funeral tent. Men who had not prayed in years bowed their heads. Women dabbed their eyes. The Kell name was on every tongue, and every tongue spoke it soft, the way you say the name of something holy. He had come to Sabine County a young man, with nothing but a strong back and a quiet way. That was the story they told. He built the range up from raw grass. 22,000 acres by the end. A house of white stone on the rise. A brand 2 men could read from 100 yards, the doubled K, burned into the best beef in 3 counties. He gave to the church. He gave to the poor. When a neighbor lost a barn to fire, Ambrose Kell sent lumber and asked no thanks. When a widow could not pay her hands, his hands cut her hay for free. That was the man they mourned. And they mourned him true. Cordelia Kell stood at the head of the grave. She was a tall woman, straight as a fence post, and the black suited her. She had married Ambrose in 65, when the range was already growing, and she had run his house for near 30 years. Her 2 sons stood beside her. Royce, the elder, hard-jawed and certain, already the master of the place though the dirt on the coffin was fresh. Turner, the younger, sharper in the mouth and softer in the spine, and a little apart from them stood the 3rd son, the youngest. Silas Kell was 19. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at his own boots, and past them, at nothing, because Silas alone carried the weight of what his father had said in the dark. The town, the mission, the book. He had told no one. He turned it over and over in his mind while the preacher spoke, and he could make nothing of it, and it would not let him rest. When his mother said those words to the county, the sons who earned his name, Silas felt something turn cold in his chest. He did not know why. He only knew his father's grip on his wrist had been the grip of a man trying to give away a secret, not a blessing. Now leave the grave. Go south. Go all the way down to the border, to a town the maps barely bother with. Paso Verde was a dusty little place hung on the seam of the country where the river ran thin and the cottonwoods gave the only shade worth having. It had a livery, a church, a store, and a smithy. The smithy belonged to Elias Marés. He had built it up himself, board by board, over 20 years. It was not much. It was honest. Folks brought their horses to be shod, and their wagons to be mended, and their broken tools to be made whole. And Elias made them whole, and they paid what they could. And that was his life. He lived alone in 2 rooms behind the forge. He had never married. He kept his mother's memory the way another man keeps a wife. The town knew him. The town half pitied him and half forgot him, the way towns do with a quiet man. They knew his mother had been Beatriz Marés, a laundress, a Tejana woman with a soft voice and hard hands, and that she had died of the fever when Elias was a small boy, and that he had been raised up by her kin under her name. They knew, because he had told them plain when asked, that his father was a rancher who never came back. He said it without heat. He had made his peace with it long ago, or told himself he had. He asked nothing of anyone. He wore his shame the way he wore his leather apron, close and worn smooth, until you forgot it was there. Here is what nobody in Paso Verde knew, and what nobody in Sabine County knew, and what makes this whole story ache. That forgotten farrier, hammering iron for coin on borrowed dirt, was the buried point of the whole grand funeral 200 miles north. He was the one thing 400 mourners had come to not talk about, and he did not know it himself. The day after they buried Ambrose Kell, a Kell rode south. But it was not one of the hard ones. It was Silas. The boy had lain awake 3 nights running. His father's voice would not leave him. Find the book. He knew only one thing to do. His father had spoken a town, and Silas had held the name in his teeth so he would not lose it, and the town was down along the border, and the mission his father named was near it. So Silas told his mother he was going to clear his head with a long ride, and she let him, because grief makes a woman careless of a quiet boy. And he pointed his horse south with nothing but a town's name, and a dead man's word, and a heart full of dread. He did not tell his brothers. Something in him knew better than that. While Silas rode, the life of Paso Verde went on, and into it, a few days behind the boy but on the same road, came a Kell trail crew driving cattle to the border pens. Turner Kell rode with them. He had come along to get out from under his mother's black mood and to feel the size of himself, which he liked to feel among men who had to laugh at his jokes. They stopped in Paso Verde to water the stock and wet their throats, and Turner, bored and loud, wandered to the smithy, where a plain, thick-shouldered man was setting a shoe. Now understand, Turner Kell had never seen this man before in his life, did not know his name, did not know his face was his own father's face, worn rough and burned dark by the border sun. He saw a farrier in a stained apron, and a farrier was a thing beneath him, and boredom is cruel. "You," Turner said. He leaned on the doorpost. "You own all this?" He swept a hand at the little forge, the tools racked clean on the wall, the anvil worn to a shine. A man playing at owning tools on borrowed dirt. He grinned back at his crew. A couple of them laughed the way paid men laugh. Turner dug in his vest and came out with a coin. He held it up so it caught the light. Then he flipped it into the mud at Elias's feet. "Go on," he said. "Fetch." The smithy went quiet. The fire ticked. Elias Marés looked at the coin in the mud. He looked at the young man in the doorway, the fine coat, the soft hands, the easy contempt. He did not flush. He did not clench. He bent, slow, and he picked the coin up out of the mud, and he wiped it clean on his apron, and he set it on the anvil. He set it down flat and unbent, the way you set down a thing that is not yours to keep. And then he turned back to the fire, and he took up his hammer, and he went on with his work as if the doorway were empty. Turner did not know what to do with that. Contempt wants a wound to feed on, and Elias gave it nothing. The younger Kell muttered something and pushed off the doorpost and went back to his crew, louder now, to cover the smallness he suddenly felt. They rode out within the hour. The coins sat on the anvil until dark. Elias did not touch it again. When he closed up that night, he flicked it into the tin where he kept nails, and thought no more about it, because a man who has swallowed the world's contempt for 40 years does not choke on one more mouthful. But an old man across the street had watched the whole thing from the store porch. And that night, over cards, he said a strange thing to the men he played with. "You know," the old man said, dealing slow, that boy in the fine coat. Had the Kell look on him. The heavy brow. He tapped his own forehead. "Reminded me of that rancher. The one used to come down here, years back." "What rancher?" another man said. And the old-timer told it. And this is the second thread, and you want to hold on to it. There had been a rancher, years and years ago, who came down to Paso Verde every spring. A big, well-dressed Sabine man, quiet, always alone. He came with the first warm weather, regular as the cottonwoods leafing out, and every spring he did the same two things. He rode out to the old part of the burying ground, to a laundress's grave with a plain small stone, and he laid flowers on it, real store flowers, and he stood there bareheaded a long while. And then he went to the parish and gave the priest money, a good sum, for the upkeep, they said, out of Christian charity. Year after year. Then one spring he stopped coming, and the years rolled on, and the town forgot. The way towns do. "Christian charity," the old man said, and shook his head. "A rich man laying flowers on a washwoman's grave every spring for years and paying the church to tend it. That's a heavy lot of charity for a stranger." The other men shrugged and played their cards. It meant nothing to them. It was just an old story about a dead spring habit. But the old-timer kept looking out the window at the dark smithy across the road, and he could not shake the heavy Kell brow he'd seen on that fine young fool, and he did not know why it troubled him. The county never knew that grief. And now, if you are listening close, you are beginning to read it. Elias Kell reached Paso Verde 4 days after his brother had ridden through it, though the boy never knew the two of them had crossed the same dust. He came in tired and saddle-sore and half-sick with the strangeness of his errand. He did not know what he was looking for. A book, in a town he'd never seen, sent by a dying man who could not finish his own sentence. He started at the church because his father had said a mission and a boy raised right starts at the church. But the priest there was young and knew nothing of any old business. He sent Silas on. "There's a mission," he said, "San Isidro, up the river away. Older than this parish. If it's old records you want, that's where the old records are." Silas thanked him and did not go at once, because he was tired and because a thing in him was afraid of what he might find. So he stayed a night, and staying, he did what a lost boy does. He talked to people. He sat in the store and he asked, in his soft, grieving way, whether anyone recalled a Sabine rancher, a Kell, ever having business this far south. He did not say his father was dead. He did not say his own name plain. But the old-timer on the porch heard the word Kell, and heard the boy's grief, and looked at the heavy brow on this younger one too, and something in the old man's chest tightened like a rope pulling snug. The old man told Silas what he'd told the card players. The spring flowers, the laundress's grave, the charity, and Silas, who had come south chasing a book, felt the ground tilt under him. Because his father had never once, in all Silas's life, spoken of the border, had never gone south that anyone knew, and here was a whole secret spring habit of the man, laid out by a stranger, tender and regular and hidden. "Whose grave?" Silas asked. His voice came out thin. "The laundress." "What was her name?" The old man had to think. "Marés," he said at last. "Beatrice Marés. Her boy's the smith now. Across the way there." He nodded at the dark forge. "Elias." Silas Kell sat very still. He did not know what he knew. But he knew it was large, and he knew it was terrible, and he knew his father had died reaching for it. He did not sleep that night. In the gray before dawn he went and stood outside the smithy and watched the smith come out and light his fire. He watched the man work. A thick-shouldered, plain-faced man of 40, with a heavy brow. Silas had seen that brow every day of his life. On his father, on Royce, in the glass, faint, on himself. He could not make his feet carry him across the road. Not yet. What do you say to a man? "Excuse me. I think my dead father." "I think you are." He did not have the words. So he watched, and he waited, and he made himself sick with waiting. Now while the boy stood frozen at the edge of the road, let me tell you what Elias carried, so that when it comes, you feel the whole weight of it. Around his neck, on a plain leather cord under his shirt, Elias Marés wore a ring. A woman's ring. Silver, worn thin, the shape of it rubbed soft by 40 years against a man's chest. It had been his mother's. It was the one thing of hers he had. There was an inscription cut inside the band, but it had worn down to ghosts, letters you could feel with a fingernail but no longer read. When folks noticed it and asked, Elias would shrug and say it was his mother's, and there were some initials in it. Some sweethearts, I guess, from before my time. He said it easy. He had decided long ago it was a girlish keepsake, a memory of some border boy she'd loved before the rancher who never came back. It was sentiment. It was not evidence. He did not know a wedding ring when it lay against his own heart. And there was a Bible. His mother's Spanish Bible, black and cracked, kept all these years by her kin and passed to Elias when the last aunt died. He did not read it much, but he kept it. There was a flower pressed flat between two pages, brown as old paper now, a spring flower dead 40 years. And inside the front cover, scratched faint in the leather, a mark. A brand. 2 Ks joined. Elias had looked at that mark as a boy and thought it was some flourish of his mother's, a decoration she'd worked into the leather. He had never once thought it was a man's brand. Why would he? He knew no brands. He knew hooves and iron. So the vault sat there the whole time, in plain sight, worn against his skin and shelved on his wall. A ring he thought was a keepsake. A brand he thought was a doodle. A grave a stranger tended out of charity. A father who never came back. The truth was all around Elias Marés like water around a fish, and he had lived his whole life in it and never once tasted it. That is the cruelty of a thing well buried. You can carry it and not know its weight. The morning wore on, and at last the boy crossed the road. Silas came into the smithy hat in hand, pale, and Elias took him for a customer at first and asked what he needed shod. And Silas said, "Nothing, sir. My name is Silas Kell." Elias's hammer did not stop, but something behind his eyes went flat and careful, the way a man's face goes when a hard thing walks up on him. Kell, he knew the name. Everyone this side of the range knew the name. And Turner Kell had stood in that same doorway a week past and flipped a coin in the mud. Elias set the shoe aside. "Well," he said, "you've a ways from home." The boy could hardly get it out. He told it in pieces, out of order, the way the young tell a thing too big for them. His father dead. The deathbed grip. The town, the mission, the book, the long ride south. And then the old man's story, the spring flowers, the laundress's grave, the charity paid year on year. And the name on the grave. Beatrice Marés. And Elias standing right there. Elias listened to all of it with his arms crossed and his face still as stone. When the boy was done, the smithy was quiet but for the fire. "So," Elias said at last. "Slow. You've ridden 200 miles to tell a blacksmith that a rich dead man laid flowers on my mother's grave." His voice had no heat in it. That was the worst of it. It had no heat at all. And you've made a whole story out of it. A story where the great Ambrose Kell is my father, and I'm not what I've always been, which is a washwoman's son with no name to his father. He shook his head, once. "Go home, boy." "But the grave," Silas said. "Every spring. And your brow, it's the same as—" "I have the brow of my mother's people," Elias said. Beatrice Marés was a strong-faced woman. "Go home. You have to understand what was happening in him. A lifetime of shame does not come undone for a stranger's story." Elias had built himself, board by board, on the fact of what he was. Fatherless, nameless, a man who had made his own worth with his own 2 hands because no man had given him any. If he let the boy's story in, if he let himself hope, and it turned out to be a boy's grief spinning fancies, it would tear down 20 years of hard-won peace for nothing. He had buried his own worth so deep to survive the burying that he could not now dig it up on a stranger's word. So he refused it. He refused the truth to protect himself from the hope of it. Silas stood there, wretched, not knowing how to make a grown man believe a thing the man did not want to believe. And at last he said the only thing he had left. "The book," he said. "My father said find the book. At the mission. I'm going up there today. I have to." He asked me with his last breath. The boy's voice broke. "Won't you at least, sir, won't you just tell me if the name's true? Was your mother Beatrice Marés? Did she die of the fever? Because if she did, then a rich man loved her enough to tend her grave for years and hide it, and that means something, and I'm the only one left who cares what." Elias did not answer for a long time. Then he said, "Lo, she died of the fever. In 63. I was 3 years old." He turned back to his fire. "Now go find your book, boy. Leave me to my work." Silas went. He rode up the river toward San Isidro that same afternoon, alone, chasing his father's last honest words. And Elias Marés stood at his anvil and did not work at all. He stood with the hammer in his hand and did not bring it down. Because something the boy had said had gotten under the door he kept shut. A rich man loved her enough to tend her grave for years and hide it. Elias had spent 40 years believing his father was a man who never came back, a man who used a poor woman and left her with a child and a shame. That was the shape of his father in his mind, and he had built himself against that shape. But the boy had brought a different shape. A man who came back. Every spring. Who laid flowers. Who paid the church to keep her grave. Who hid a grief so deep the whole rich county never knew it. That was not the shape of a man who used a woman and left. That was the shape of a man who had lost something and could not stop mourning it. Elias did not sleep that night either, and in the small hours he did the thing he had not done in a long time. He took his mother's Bible down off the wall, and he opened it, and he looked at the pressed flower dead 40 years, and he ran his thumb over the faint mark scratched inside the cover. The 2 Ks joined, and for the first time in his life he looked at it and did not see a woman's doodle. He saw a mark a man might make. A brand, and he did not know brands, but he knew now that the Kell brand was 2 Ks, because the whole border knew it, because it was burned on the best beef in 3 counties, and the boy had worn it stitched on his very saddle when he rode up that morning. Elias sat with the Bible open on his knees a long, long time. He did not decide anything that night. Not yet. A man does not turn his whole life over in one dark. But he took the ring out from under his shirt, the worn silver band, and he held it up to the lamp, and he looked at the ghost letters inside it that he had told himself all his life were some sweetheart's initials. He could not read them. They were too worn. But he pressed his thumbnail into the grooves. Slow, and he felt the shapes of letters he had never once tried to read, because he had decided long ago there was nothing in them worth reading. Now there was. In the morning, Elias closed the forge. He hung the sign that said gone, and he did not say to where. He rode out to the old part of the burying ground, to the plain small stone with his mother's name, the grave a stranger had tended out of charity for all those years. It had gone neglected since. The kin were dead. The town had forgotten. The stone leaned. Weeds had come up thick around it, and the letters were filling with lichen. Elias got down on his knees in the dirt. He pulled the weeds, one by one, with his blacksmith's hands, the hands that could bend iron, gentle now as a nursemaid's. He scraped the lichen from the letters until his mother's name stood clean and sharp again. Beatrice Marés. He found the stone had sunk and canted, and he dug around its base and packed the earth and set it true and upright, plumb as a fence post. The way he would set anything that had come loose. It took him the whole morning. He did not hurry it. It was the first thing he had ever done for her that felt like more than grief. It felt like a vow. He did not know yet what he would find, or whether he would go and find anything at all. He told himself he was only tending a grave, but kneeling there in the sun, with his mother's name clean under his hands, Elias Marés made himself a quiet promise that he would learn her truth, whatever it cost. That if a man had loved her and hidden her and let her die a washwoman with a shame on her, then Elias would at last, know her true name. Wife or no, shame or no, he would know. He did not know he was being watched. While Elias knelt in the border dust setting his mother's stone true, word was already running north. A traveler had carried it up the road, the way word carries in empty country. That a Kell boy, the young one, Silas, had been down in Paso Verde asking after old Kell business. Asking about a laundress. Asking about a mission and a book. The word reached the Kell range, and it reached Royce Kell, the eldest of the second line, master of the place now that his father was in the ground. And Royce went cold and still when he heard it. Because Royce Kell knew what the mission business was. He had not always known it, but he had known it since he was a young man of 20, when he had come quiet into the house one night and heard his mother and the family lawyer talking low behind a door, and had stood in the dark hall and listened to a thing he was never meant to hear. He had heard the words first marriage. He had heard the word mission. He had heard his mother say, in that dry, hard voice of hers, that the papers were dealt with, that no book that far south would ever trouble them, that the boy down there knew nothing and would die knowing nothing, and good riddance to the whole shame of it. Royce had crept back out into the night and never spoken of it, not once. In 10 years, he had folded it away and built his certainty on top of it, the way you build a house over a filled-in well and forget the water's still down there in the dark. He had assumed the bloodline was his. He, the eldest of the sons who earned the name. He had never once, in 10 years, imagined that a book could outrank a blood he assumed was clean. And now his fool of a little brother had ridden south and started turning over the very stone their mother had spent 30 years sitting on. There was worse. And here is where the clock starts ticking. So mark it. Royce had done a thing his mother did not know. In the last 2 years, while his father was failing and the range wanted money it did not have, Royce had gone quiet to the Cattlemen's Trust of Sabine County and borrowed against the land. $6,000. A secret note, his own name on it, the range itself put up as surety. And the note came due in 30 days. Royce had meant to pay it out of the spring beef, and no one the wiser. And it would have worked. It would all have worked, because the title to the range was clean, and a clean title is the same as money. But a clouded title is not. A clouded title is a called note. If word ever got to the trust that the Kell deed was in doubt, that some other heir might have a claim on the ground Royce had mortgaged, the trust would call the $6,000 on the instant, and Royce could not pay it, and the whole range would come down on his head like a barn in a flood. So now you see the shape of Royce's fear. It was not only pride, it was ruin. The very thing that could unseat him, an old book 200 miles south, was the very thing that could call his secret note and take from him even what he had mortgaged. He had 30 days, and his brother was down there digging. Royce did not go to his mother. He did not go to Turner. He moved the way a hard certain man moves when the ground shifts. He called 2 of his steadiest men, the kind who did not ask why, and he told them to ride south to a border town called Paso Verde and settle a small matter quietly. To see who was asking questions, and to see the questions stopped. And then he sat down and wrote a short cold letter to his brother Silas, ordering the boy home at once, home this instant, on their dead father's authority and his own. No argument, no delay. He sent the men and the letter south on the same road, into the same dust, toward a smith kneeling at his mother's grave, and a boy riding up a river toward an old priest and an older book. And Elias Marés, rising at last from the clean-set stone, wiping the graveyard dirt from his blacksmith's hands, did not know that he had already, by the simple act of tending his mother's grave, and half-believing a boy, set 2 riders on the road to stop him. And a note ticking down toward ruin, and a whole buried marriage turning in its sleep 200 miles away. He only knew the stone stood true now. And that he had made a promise. And that up the river, at a mission he had never seen, there was said to be a book. He stood a while in the sun with his hat in his hand. Then he settled it back on his head, and he looked north, and then he looked up the river to the west, and a man who had spent 40 years asking nothing of anyone felt, for the first time, the pull of a question he could not put down. He did not yet know that he would ride to find the answer himself, but the road was already full of riders coming for him, and the book was already open, waiting, in an old man's careful hands, with a name in it that had been true for 30 years, while the whole world called it a lie. He did not tell anyone he was going. There was no one to tell. He banked the fire in the smithy that night, and he laid his tools in their places, each one where his hand would know it in the dark. He rolled a blanket, he filled a canteen from the well, he took down the black Bible with the cracked spine, and he wrapped it in oilcloth, and he set it in his saddlebag, next to a heel of bread and a twist of jerked beef. Then he stood in the doorway a while and looked at the town. Paso Verde slept the way small towns sleep, with 1 dog barking and 1 lamp burning somewhere, and the rest gone dark. It was the only place he had ever known. He had shot its horses and mended its wagons and set its broken gates for 20 years. It had let him do that. It had never once asked him to sit at its table. He touched the ring under his shirt, the worn silver band on its leather cord, warm now from his own skin. "All right," he said to no one. "I'll go and see." He rode out before the sun, west and a little south, up along the river toward the mission he had never seen. The country changed as he went. The mesquite thinned, and the river ran shallow over pale stones, and there were old fields out there gone back to grass, and stone fences with no houses left to guard. A day of it. A cold night under a mesquite with the horse cropping close, and the stars hard and white overhead. And Elias Marés, 40 years old, lay on his back on the ground his mother had walked before him, and did not sleep much, and did not pray, and only listened to the river run, and thought, she came this way once. Young, alive, somebody's bride, or somebody's shame, and I am going to find out which. The mission stood on a low rise above a bend in the river. San Isidro. Adobe gone the color of old bread, a bell in a squat tower, a wall of cactus and a few goats, and a garden somebody still tended. It was smaller than he had pictured. Everything true is smaller than you picture it. An old man came out to meet him before he had swung down, bent nearly double, a face like a walnut, seamed and brown, and eyes that had gone pale at the rims but not gone dim. He wore a cassock rusty with age. He shaded his eyes and looked up at the rider a long time. "Marés," the old priest said. Not a question. Elias went cold all the way through. "You said my name," he said. How do you know my name?" "I don't know you." The old man came closer. His hand, when he laid it on the horse's neck, shook with the years. "I knew your mother. You have her mouth. And you have his brow. I married them under that roof 30 years ago, and I have been waiting a long time for one of the children to come and ask me about it. I only thought," he said, "it would be one of the other ones." "Father Alarcon," Elias said. It was the name the boy had said. It came out of him rough. "Come down off that horse, son," the old priest said. "You've ridden 2 days. Come inside. It's cool inside. I'll show you the book." The book was a register, a great heavy thing, bound in leather gone to suede with handling, its pages the color of weak tea. Father Alarcon laid it on a plank table in a whitewashed room, where the light came slantwise through one small window. He turned the pages with a licked thumb, slow, patient, and his lips moved over names that had gone to dust years ago. Baptisms, burials, marriages, a whole parish's worth of coming and going, written in a young man's steady hand that had grown old inside these same covers. "Here," he said. He turned the book toward Elias and set one crooked finger on a line. Elias could not read the Latin of it, but he could read the names. He had been reading his mother's name off a small stone all his life. Beatrice Marés, and beside it, in the same faded ink, joined to it by the priest's careful phrasing and the date and the word matrimonium, Ambrose Kell. The year was 1859. They stood right there, Father Alarcon said softly, and he lifted his finger and pointed at the packed clay floor by the far wall, at nothing, at a place where 2 young people had once stood. She wore her mother's shawl. He was so nervous he dropped the ring, and it rolled, and a boy went under the bench for it, and everybody laughed, and it broke the fear. I remember that. 50 years of weddings, and I remember that one. He was not a rich man yet. He was a young man, in from the north, with borrowed money and a good horse, and she was the loveliest girl in this valley, and they were married in the eyes of God and the law of Texas on a spring morning, and I signed it. And there it is. Elias could not speak. He put his own blunt, scarred finger on the page beside the priest's, not touching the ink, just near it, the way you reach toward a fire to know if it is real. "Then I am not," he started, and had to stop and start again. "Then she was not. Your mother was a wife," Father Alarcon said. "Married, lawful, and you." He turned back a leaf, 2 leaves, ran his finger down a column of baptisms and stopped. "There. Born the next year. Baptized in this church. Elias, son of Ambrose and Beatrice Kell." The old man looked up at him, and the pale eyes were wet and steady. "You are no bastard son, you never were. You are his firstborn and his lawful son, and the whole time the world told you to keep your eyes down, you were the eldest child of one of the richest men in Sabine County, and he knew it, and he let it stand." Elias Marés put both his hands flat on the plank table to hold himself up. 20 years at the anvil, 40 years of stepping aside, a lifetime of being the thing the town half pitied and half forgot, the laundress's boy, the man with no father, the man who owned tools on borrowed dirt. He had carried the shame so long, he had stopped feeling the weight of it, the way you stop feeling a stone in your boot if you walk on it far enough. And it had never been his shame to carry. It had been theirs. Why? He got out. Why did he leave us? If he married her. If I was. Fever took her in 63, the priest said. You were 3. And by then he had gone north and made himself into a big man, and a big man does not go back for a dead laundress and a brown-skinned child, not in this country, not then. He chose the range. He chose the name. He married again for cattle and acreage and let a whole marriage sink. Father Alarcon closed the book gently, the way you close a coffin. But he never told me to strike the page. In 50 years he never once asked me to lose the book, and he came, every spring. Do you know that? He rode down the river and up to Paso Verde, and he laid flowers on her grave, and he paid me to keep the roof over this register, and he never signed his name to any of it. That was his penance, a coward's penance, paid in secret. But he kept the book alive. The old man laid his shaking hand flat on the leather cover, and a book kept alive will outtalk any lie a rich family tells. Given time. Given one honest man to open it, Elias looked at the ring in his hand. He had drawn it out without knowing. The worn band, the inscription gone to ghosts. He held it toward the small square of window light and turned it. "There's something on it," he said. "Worn near away." I always thought it was some sweetheart's letters, my mother's. Father Alarcon took it from him with 2 trembling fingers and held it close to his failing eyes. "A. K," he read. Slow. "B.M. San Isidro. 59. He handed it back. He had it made for her here. In the village, there's still a man makes rings like it. The priest smiled, and it was a terrible, tender thing on that old face. "You've worn your father's promise around your neck your whole life, son, and called it a stranger's." Elias stayed 2 days at the mission. He would have ridden straight home. Something in him wanted only to get back to the fire and the anvil and the one town that had ever let him stand still. But the old priest would not let him go empty. "You think this is only yours," Father Alarcon said, on the second evening, when the goats were in and the light was going. "It isn't. A man who buries a marriage to steal a range has robbed more than a son, and the ones who kept it buried after him are robbing still, this minute, while we sit here." He set a paper in front of Elias, and an inkwell, and a pen. "I am old, and I do not fear much anymore, and least of all a family of ranchers 200 miles north. I will write it out. Certified, copied fair, and sworn, and sealed with the parish seal. And I will carry it myself to the land office at Sabine Wells, if these legs will bear me one more journey. Or you will carry it. But it goes north. It has waited 30 years to go north. It will not wait for your leave to be shy about it." So, it was written. The old man copied the marriage line and the baptism line onto clean paper in his careful hand. He wrote an affidavit under it that he, Tobias Alarcon, priest of this mission for 51 years, had with his own hands married Ambrose Kell to Beatrice Marés in the year 1859, and baptized their lawful son Elias the year following, and that both records stood unaltered in the register that had never left this house. He signed it. He pressed the parish seal into a puddle of wax, and he wrapped the copy and the register both in oilcloth, the register too, for it does not leave my sight until a judge has seen the truth with the original in his own hands. They rode north together. An old priest on a mule and a blacksmith on a tired horse, up out of the river country and onto the long grass roads towards Sabine Wells, carrying a book 200 miles to overturn a dead man's lie. But the news had already gone the other way. For while Elias sat at the mission learning that he was somebody, word of him was running up the range like fire in dry grass. A Kell boy asking questions in a border town. A smith down south wearing a silver ring. A mission, a book, a grave, with a rancher's flowers on it every spring for years and no rancher's name to explain them. It reached the Kell range, and it reached Royce. Royce Kell was 30 years old, and he ran 22,000 acres with a hard, certain hand, and he had a secret that made him harder. When he was 20, he had stood outside his father's study and heard his mother and the family lawyer talk in low voices about the mission business, about the first one, about papers that had been dealt with. He had never told a soul he heard it. He had filed it away the way a careful man files away a loaded gun, and in the last 2 years, quietly, on his own name, he had borrowed $6,000 from the Cattlemen's Trust of Sabine County against the range. Drought, and a bad market, and grand plans. The note came due in 30 days, and the whole of it, Every acre he had put up as surety rested on one thing, that the title to the Kell range was clean, undisputed, his to pledge. A clouded title would call the note. A rival heir would call the note. He had done the arithmetic of his own ruin 100 times in the dark. So when the word came south, Royce did not hesitate. He had already sent 2 steady men down the road to Paso Verde to see who was asking and to see the asking stopped, and he had already written his brother a cold letter ordering him home. Now he saddled and rode himself, hard, down toward the border, to be there when the matter was settled, because a thing this size he would not leave to hired men. And Turner rode with him. Turner, who had flipped a coin in the mud at a farrier and told him to fetch. Turner, who did not yet know whose son that farrier was, and who would have to learn it in the worst way there is. They caught Elias on the road home. He had parted from the old priest a half-day back, Father Alarn gone ahead by the wagon road toward the land office with a hired driver, safer for his old bones, and Elias cutting across the shorter horse track to reach Paso Verde and set his affairs in order before it all came down. They caught him in the open, 4 riders spreading out of a draw as easy as if they had been waiting, which they had. Royce in front, Turner at his shoulder, 2 hard men behind. "You the smith," Royce said. Not a question either. These Kells did not ask questions. They stated things and waited for the world to agree. "I'm the smith," Elias said. He kept his hands on the horn. He did not reach for anything. He had nothing to reach for. Turner's face had gone strange. He was staring, and the sneer he had brought was sliding off it. "I know you," Turner said slowly. "You're the one from the livery. The one with the tools." And then, uncertain, quieter, because he had a brother 19 years old with that same brow, and he was seeing it now on a man of 40. "You're the shut-up Turner," Royce said. Royce swung down. He walked forward through the grass, unhurried, a man used to the ground rearranging itself under his boots. He drew out a fold of banknotes from his coat, and he held it up so the sun could count it. "There's more here than a man like you sees in 3 years, Royce said. "It's yours. Right now. You take it, you sign this paper my man's got that says you make no claim on any Kell property nor name, not now, not ever, and you get on that horse and you ride so far south you fall off the map, and nobody ever hears the word Mars on this range again." He held it closer. "That's the generous version. You're a smart man. You've been poor your whole life. 6,000 troubles walk away for the price of 1 signature. Take the money." Elias looked at the banknotes. He thought about his mother scrubbing other people's linen with hands that cracked and bled in the winter water. He thought about her small stone with the graveyard dirt over it and no name but hers. He thought about a rich man laying spring flowers there in secret and never once, never one single time, standing up in the daylight to say what she had been to him. "Your father tended her grave," Elias said. "Did you know that? Every spring. Flowers, he paid the church to keep the roof on the book with our names in it. He carried the truth around in secret his whole life because he was too much a coward to say it out loud. And you're standing here offering me money to be a coward the same way he was." Elias shook his head. Slow. "No. I'll not take your money, and I'll not sign your paper. Not because I want your range. I never wanted your range. I wanted to be let alone with my mother's memory, and you people won't even let me have that. So no." Royce's face did not move. But something behind it did. The generous version was over. "Then you'll be run off it," he said. "One way or the other. There's country out there a man goes into and doesn't come out of. You've got a fire in a town that would burn real easy. You've got a life down there small enough to snuff. I'm telling you plain, Smith, and I don't tell a thing twice. Ride south tonight, and keep riding, or the choosing gets taken out of your hands." And Elias Marés, who had spent 40 years asking nothing of anyone, who had stood still and eaten every insult this family and its like had ever thrown at him, Elias sat his horse in the long grass with 4 armed men around him, and did not raise a hand, and did not raise his voice. "You do what you think you have to," he said quietly. "I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to run, either. The book's already gone north, Mr. Kell. It's already in front of the judge, or it will be by morning, in an old priest's own hands, with the seal of the church on it. You can kill me on this road. It won't unmarry my mother. It won't unwrite the page. You're not fighting me. You never were. You're fighting a book that's been telling the truth for 30 years while your family called it a lie. And you can't run that off the border." The silence went long. Turner had gone gray. He had done the sum now, the whole terrible sum, and he sat his horse like a man who has felt the floor go out from under a house. And it was Turner, in the end, who said, low and cracked, Royce, look at his face. Look at it. That's Pa's face. That's Silas's brow on a man twice Silas's age. Royce, what did they do? What did they do to keep this quiet?" "Shut your mouth," Royce said. But it came out thin. There was a 5th rider on the road. He had come up from the south at a hard gallop, and he came out of the low sun so they saw him late, and he did not slow. Silas, 19 years old, hatless, his horse lathered to the girth, and behind him at a distance 2 more men that were not Kell men at all, but wore the star of the county on their coats. "Leave him be," Silas shouted, still coming. "Royce, leave him be. I've got the court's men with me. You touch him. You touch him in front of the law. Father's dead, Royce. It's over. It was over the day he told me to find the book. Leave our brother be. Our brother." The word fell into that grass, and nobody could pick it up again. Royce Kell looked at his youngest brother, and at the 2 county men reining in with their hands resting easy near their hips, and at the smith who had not moved, who had not run, who had not raised so much as a finger, and Royce understood, the way a hard certain man understands when the certainty finally cracks, that he had already lost, and had lost some while ago, back before he ever rode south, back 30 years ago, in a room where a book was supposed to have been dealt with and never was. He put the banknotes away. His hand was not steady doing it. "We'll settle it in front of the judge then," he said, and it was meant to sound like a threat, and it came out like a man reading his own sentence. They rode north. All of them, together and apart. Toward Sabine Wells, and the land office and Judge Harlan Pryor, and a church that had once been full of mourners. Judge Pryor did not hold the deed contest in a courthouse. He held it in the church. He did it on purpose, some said after, though he never claimed it. The land office was too small for the crowd, and the crowd was the whole county, because word of a thing like this cannot be kept, and near 400 people had come to bury Ambrose Kell not 2 weeks past, and now near the same 400 came again to that same tall church to hear who Ambrose Kell had really been. The same pews, the same high windows, the same faces that had wept for the model rancher, the finest family man the range ever raised. Elias Marés sat in the front on the left, in a clean shirt somebody had lent him, his hands folded and still. He had shod half the horses tied up outside. Some of the men who owned them would not meet his eye. Some would. Cordelia Kell sat on the right, in black still, her veil down. Royce beside her, jaw set. Turner passed him, staring at the floor. And down the row, apart from all of them, sat Silas, who had put himself on his father's true son's side of the aisle and would not be moved. Judge Pryor was a big, slow man with a voice that filled a room without being raised. He set the matter out plain for the county. A claim had come before the land office, a claim that the deed to the Kell Range, 22,000 acres, standing in the name of the second family, rested on a lie. That there had been a first marriage, that there was a lawful, living elder son, and that the record of it had been kept, all these years, in a book. "Bring the book," Judge Pryor said, and Father Tobias Alarcon, 51 years a priest, bent nearly double, came up the aisle of that great church, one slow step at a time, with the register in his two shaking arms. You could hear the crowd breathing. That was all. 400 people, and a bent old man's feet on the stone, and the leather book creaking as he laid it open on the rail before the judge. "Read it, Father," Pryor said, gently, for even a circuit judge gentles his voice for a man that old carrying a thing that heavy. "Read it out so they all hear it." The old priest found the place. He had found it 1,000 times. He put his finger on the line, and he lifted his old cracked voice, and he read into the silence of the church that had eulogized Ambrose Kell, the marriage of Ambrose Kell. In the year of our Lord 1859, he read, "In this mission of San Isidro, before God and these witnesses, I joined in holy matrimony Ambrose Kell, of the Northern Range, and Beatrice Marés, of this parish." Beatrice Marés. Her name went out over 400 heads that had spent 30 years never once hearing it, and it filled the church to the rafters. A laundress's name spoken lawful and loud in the finest room in the county, and there were old women who wept to hear it though they did not know her, wept for the plain human sound of a buried woman named at last. Alarcon turned a leaf. And in the year following, he read, "I baptized their lawful son, Elias, son of Ambrose and Beatrice Kell." He closed the book. He looked out at all of them with his pale wet eyes, and he said, not reading now, saying it, "I married them. I baptized the boy. I have kept this book 50 years, and no man ever asked me to change a word of it, and no man could have. It is the truth. It was always the truth. It only wanted the daylight." Judge Harlan Pryor examined the register himself. The original. The seal. The unbroken binding. The ink aged even through the same years as the ink around it. No page cut. No line struck. He examined the certified copy and the affidavit. He asked the old priest 3 plain questions and got 3 plain answers. And then he set his big hands flat on the rail, and he gave his ruling to the county in that filled church. Slow and clear so no soul in it could ever say they had not heard. "The court finds the marriage of 1859 lawful and unbroken," Pryor said. "The court finds Elias Marés, Elias Kell, the true-born and eldest lawful son of Ambrose Kell. And the court finds that the deed to the Kell range, having passed over a living lawful elder heir by concealment, cannot stand as written." He lifted his eyes to the second family in their pew. "The title is overturned. The range descends to the firstborn, 22,000 acres, and the deed with it, passed this day to Elias." Overturned overnight. The thing the whole county had thought was settled 30 years deep, undone in the length of an old man's reading. And then, because a reckoning is not one blow but many, each face in that pew had to take its own. Cordelia Kell sat very straight under her veil while the ruling came down, straight as she had sat at the graveside, promising the range to the sons who earned the name. But when Judge Pryor asked her, direct, before them all, whether she had known of the first marriage, whether the widow of Ambrose Kell had known there was a lawful son when she stood over her husband's grave and swore the range to her own boys, the straightness went out of her all at once, like a stay pulled from a wall. She lifted her veil with a hand gone old in an instant, and she said, dry, flat, to the whole church, "I always knew about the mission business." Just that. She meant it to sound like nothing. It sounded like a confession, because it was one sworn out of her own mouth in front of the very people she had spent 30 years fooling, and she heard it land, and she sat back down and did not speak again. Royce did not sit back down. Royce came up out of the pew, and it was not toward Elias he lunged, and not toward the priest. It was toward the table where the papers lay, the deed papers, and folded among the court's documents now that everything had come into the open, the note. The secret $6,000 note he had signed against a range that was no longer his to pledge. He reached for it as if he could snatch it back into secrecy, as if paper unseen is paper unmade. Pryor's gavel came down like a shot. "Sit down, Mr. Kell." And the man from the Cattlemen's Trust of Sabine County, who had come like everyone else to hear the scandal, and had heard instead that his $6,000 was secured against a title just ruled clouded from the day it was signed, that man was already on his feet, already reaching for his own coat, already doing the arithmetic that Royce had done 100 times in the dark. The note would be called. Royce Kell, who rode south to protect a fortune, had lost even the money he had borrowed against it. He sat down where the gavel told him to, and he put his hard, certain face in his hands. Turner Kell did not lunge, and did not straighten, and did not speak. Turner only sank lower and lower in the pew, the way a man sinks who is trying to leave a room without standing up, and he was seeing it over and over behind his eyes, the coin, the mud, the smith who had set it unbent on the anvil and turned back to the fire, a coin flipped for a beggar who was, the whole time, the lord of the range Turner had thought was his. He would carry that small, bright coin the rest of his life. Some men are undone by great crimes. Turner was undone by a small cruelty that turned out to have been aimed at a king. And Silas Kell, 19, who had done nothing but obey his dying father's last honest words and ride south to find a book, Silas rose from the pew and walked across the front of that church, across the open floor where everyone could see, and he stood at Elias's shoulder. He had lost his inheritance in that ruling the same as his brothers. The range would never be his now. He did not seem to have thought about it once. He put his hand on his half-brother's arm, the older man he had known 2 weeks, and he said, low, only for him, "I'm glad I found you. I'm glad it was me he sent." And of all the Kells in that room, the boy who lost the most walked out of it with the only clean name left in the family. Then it was quiet, and it was Elias's to speak, and he stood. He did not make a speech. He had never made a speech in his life. He looked at the second family in their pew, the widow with her veil in her lap, the eldest with his face in his hands, the middle one sunk low, and he said the one thing he had come 200 miles and 40 years to say, and he said it quietly, without any heat in it at all, which was worse than heat. "You spent a lifetime hiding a name," Elias said. "It was carrying you the whole time." And then he turned to the judge, and he asked one thing more, and it surprised the whole church, which had come braced for vengeance, and got something it had no name for. "Your Honor," Elias said, "there's a house on the north pasture. The widow's lived in it a long time. I'd asked the court to let her keep it. I've no use for it, and my mother didn't raise me to put a woman out of her home, whatever she knew or didn't." He looked once at Cordelia, and there was nothing in it she could use, no triumph, no mercy she could resent, only a plain man declining to become what had been done to him. Let her keep the house. Judge Pryor looked at him a long moment. Then he wrote it into the order. 1 year later, the dawn came up gold over the Kell Range, and it was worked plainly now, under one plain man's hand. The doubled K brand stayed on the cattle. A brand is only a mark, and there was no sense confusing 22,000 acres of stock over an old man's sins. But the gate at the main road carried a small new plaque, wood, cut by a smith who still liked the feel of his own tools. Marés Kell, it said. Her name first. He had thought about that a while and decided it was right. He kept a few of the old hands, and he hired some new. Silas stayed on as his foreman, and the boy was good at it, better than the range had let him be before, and the two of them ate at the same table most nights, and did not talk much, and did not need to. Once a season or so, in the evening, Silas would say something that started with "Pa used to," and then stop, and Elias would let it sit, and after a while, one or the other would go on to something else. It was enough. It was more family than either of them had counted on. Every spring, When the first flowers came, Elias Marés rode south. 2 days down along the river the way he had ridden it, once not knowing anything. Down to Paso Verde, to the old part of the burying ground, to a small plain stone he had cleaned and reset with his own hands and left plain, because she had been a plain woman and would not have wanted marble. He laid flowers on it. He did it in the daylight now. He did it where the town could see, and the town had learned to nod to him, and some of them came and stood a minute too. His father had done the same. In secret, ashamed. For 30 years, Elias did it in the open. That was the whole difference between them, and it was the only difference that had ever mattered. On his hand, not on a cord under his shirt anymore, but on his own finger, in the light, he wore the silver ring. He had taken it to the man in the mission village who still made rings like it and had the worn inscription cleaned and cut fresh, so it could be read again the way it was meant to be read. A.K. B.M. San Isidro, 1859. His mother and father, joined in silver, out loud, at last. The others the county still spoke of, now and then, the way a county does. Cordelia Kell lived quiet in the north pasture house that Elias had let her keep, and she did not go to town much, and the Vale folks said she had put away for good. Royce worked another man's cattle now, for wages, 2 counties over, the note long since called, and the borrowed money, and the lender's patience both gone. A hard certain man learning to take orders. Turner had left the country altogether the month after the ruling, and no letter had come back. And Silas, the youngest, who had obeyed the one honest thing his father ever asked and lost a fortune doing it, rode out every morning across ground that would never be his, and did not seem to grudge a foot of it, because he had gotten the thing his brothers hadn't, which was to be able to look at himself. A ledger can lie for 30 years. A whole county can kneel to the lie and weep at its funeral. But a book kept honest one spring afternoon by one old priest who never asked why. A book like that does not die when the men who feared it die. It only waits. It waits for daylight, and one plain man too stubborn to stay ashamed, and it outtalks every lie in the end. Elias stood a while by the small stone with his hat in his hand and the ring in the sun, and then he settled his hat back on his head and rode home to a range that carried his mother's name. If this story found you tonight, and you know what it is to be looked at and counted for less than you are, tell me the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story rides.